Here with Edward Gonzalez, good friend of mine since 2004. Edward is a retired U.S. Marine, and I've got Ed here today so I can talk to him about his fascination with cars. One of the reasons why this interests me is I'm what I would consider not a car guy. I don't know much about cars other than the cosmetics of what I like, what I see, and what I enjoy driving. But for you, makes, models, how it applies to a year when the body styles changed, all of this fascinates me. And to hear your conversations and how you tell people what you think about this car and why and what streamline it is based on the make and model has always impressed me. And I've learned quite a bit from you, over the years of just having small conversations about cars. So without further ado, thank you for being here.
No, pleasure to be here, man. Thanks for having me. And you're right, man. Cars is something that's always fascinated me, man. Something I've always enjoyed since I was a kid, and it's something that's continued till this day.
Yeah. Do you remember what age you were and when you found a love for cars?
Man, to be honest with you, man, it'd be difficult because I think it's easier for me to look back and say, when did I start liking cars? And I think as long as I have memory, I've remembered just like my mom's car. I remember she used to have like a 1975 Ford Thunderbird, like burgundy red with this like white gaudy interior. Yeah, not 3rd Battalion red, but my dad had this Mercury, huge 4-door car. So it's not like they had great cars, but I remember those cars and I remember liking them for whatever reason. And from then on, like my attraction to cars, driving around everywhere we would go with my parents, I was always looking out the window, just like identifying cars, seeing that's a Ford, a Chevy, whatever the case may be. And just as I got to learn more and more about cars, I just continued the fascination.
So what age were you when you got your driver's license?
16, man. I think like right on the dot.
Really?
Yeah.
Was that was the state law in Illinois?
In Illinois, yeah. We used to do driver's ed in school. So I think it's one of our gym periods, they would like substitute for driver's ed, and they'd do everything, man. Even come out, DMV would come out. So all we'd have to do is show up with our paperwork the moment you were 16 and you had your license, man, and I couldn't wait. So
do you think that the environment that you grew up in has an effect on people that enjoy cars? Like for me, I still consider myself not a car guy, but I grew up in the country and I learned how to drive in a pickup truck. So I became fascinated with trucks and still am to this day. Do you think that has an effect on what you enjoy?
Yeah, I definitely think it does, man. I mean, because like for example, I was the complete opposite. Growing up in inner city Chicago, you didn't really see much trucks. I mean, if you did, they were kind of ratty construction trucks or construction vans and things like that. So I was more into sedans, sport cars. Of course, I'd say probably about the only cars in the 80s that kind of fascinated me was I think every kid probably had that picture of the Lamborghini, the white Lamborghini with the suicide doors, or Magnum PI, Ferrari. So those are the kind of things that fascinated me more.
I had the General Lee.
Yeah,
as a
I love that car too. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. So what did you learn on, a stick or a manual or automatic when you went to driver's ed?
I think we had to learn both. To be honest with you, I'm not too sure, but I remember I was able to drive both, getting my license. So
yeah. So what was the change in transition for you that you remember, where you went from a domestic car to knowing what a classic car was and going back in time to where these things were standouts?
Man, I'd probably say in my early teens, because as you start to kind of research, I think as you start to get closer to getting your license, you start asking yourself, what would I drive and what would I dream of driving? So that's when I kind of started to do a little bit more of my research on cars and the shows that I was watching, and I think all of that started to kind of migrate me. As a kid that was born in the mid-70s, I said, man, our cars were garbage in the 70s, man. So I kind of migrated more to the 60s cars, the muscle era car. Of the 1960s, American muscle was just something that I think at that point really fascinating. I'd say probably about maybe 16.
Really, 16?
Yeah.
So did you have Hot Wheels when you were growing up?
Oh, yeah.
I learned about cars through Hot Wheels.
Yes.
But what makes you so different is that I could tell you what the car actually is by maybe a make, maybe a model, but when it comes to torque, horsepower, the year the body style changed, all of those things that you seem to know, I can't. It never was like a fascination for me. At 16, did you start developing that too, to where you knew what torque was, you knew what horsepower was?
You know, to be honest with you, I wasn't much of an engine kind of mechanics kind of guy until maybe later in life. I think early on it was just mostly cosmetics,
Yeah.
where I understood maybe by looking at a headlight, a tail light, you know, a fin. I knew what year, you know, the car was, when it changed. But as far as engines and all that, I don't think I got into that a little bit later in life. But back to what you were saying with the Hot Wheels, man. Yeah, no, it was my collection of Hot Wheels, man, was massive. You know, massive. I had all kind of cars, neatly, meticulously
Yeah.
kept, you know, and never crashed them, smashed them. And I think it kind of goes back to how I take care of cars today, because you know I was so careful with them back then that now that I've got my actual cars, man, I try to take care of them now.
Yeah, that's great. You know what also is interesting for me is I've noticed with you, not only your love for a muscle car and classics, but you apply some of the same principles when you look for your everyday car. Like when I watched or heard you talk about purchasing a new car that you were going to drive to and from work, you seem to use the same method of how you chose your classic car, and we'll get to that later, on how you chose your domestic car. Am I right or wrong on that?
You know, I think so, because I mean, when you realize that, you know, obviously a long commute, that you're actually going to spend a lot of time in the car, so you want something that is comfortable but has horsepower, can perform. So I think, yeah, you kind of do apply those same principles when you're buying a car now. And after you do drive, I think one thing I can say to everybody that, you know, knows about cars and muscle cars is that once you drive a car with power, you can never go down, man, to something without power. Like if I go back to the US, man, and I get a rental car that's like a little small engine, I'm like dying. I was like, this is horrible. So,
You know, I try to relate it to like something that I know, where let's say hiking, the right pack, the right shoes. You know, you get what you pay for. So I meet people that try to save money and they get the cheapest hiking shoe or the cheapest pack because they want to save money, and they look at it as it carries my gear just like this big name brand. But if you apply that method to a car, do you think that's something that, or is that something that frustrates you when you hear someone use that method? Or do you think it's worth it to spend the money and get what you know you're going to get out of a car?
you know, to be honest with you, I think with a car, because not everybody is a car person. I would say that maybe everybody that hikes, you know, has a commonality that, you know, they love to be outdoors, they love to hike, but they're maybe skimping on quality. Not everybody that's a car person needs to buy a car. I guess a car is more of a necessity. So I think it kind of goes with how they prioritize the budget of a car, man. Like, you know, I'd look at some other expenses that people make that I would probably never make. But for me, to have a nice car and be comfortable and not, you know, luxurious or anything, but for me, it's always been kind of a priority to have a nice car, you know. And I think because we spend so much time in our cars,
Yes.
and I really don't have any other vices, man, other than just like to have a nice car.
Well, you're a big family man, so like your father, your brothers, uncles, were they into cars, and did they teach you about it, or is it the other way around?
You know, I had an uncle that was into cars in Chile, but, you know, I kind of stopped venturing into Chile when I was like 10 years old. So he instilled a little bit in me. But no, man, to be honest with you, my dad knew a lot about cars, but he wasn't a car guy. He was kind of more of a, I have a car for necessity kind of thing. But I think I'm maybe the first one in my family, man, that's been like a real car junkie.
Wow.
Yeah.
You know, going back to some of the things that's impressed me is like if I mention a car that I like, and you'll tell me, oh, that's just this type of car on this platform, I never would have even known that or thought of it that way. One thing that was interesting that you told me at one point, and I hope you can share this now, I'd like you to elaborate, is when you told me about how you viewed being treated with maintenance and how they would take care of you when you bought a Cadillac as opposed to, was it a Nissan?
Ford
Or Ford, yes.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess as maybe you get older in life, you know, as a young Marine, you know, you can only afford, you know, so many things. And, you know, I used to have a Ford Thunderbird. I remember going to the Ford dealer to get taken care of. And I guess, you know, just the maintenance, man, the service was just really, really bad, man. And then later on in life, man, I was able to buy a Cadillac. And the first time I remember going into the Cadillac dealer, you know, to take it in for like routine maintenance, man, I mean, the way you get treated, you see, I guess maybe you're not just buying a little bit more in car performance and luxury, but the service that you get, for me, was night and day. So it's definitely a big difference.
So you bought a classic car.
I did. Yeah.
What is it again?
It's a 1967 Camaro SSRS.
Wow.
Yeah.
I've obviously seen pictures of it. It's gorgeous. So I know you spent a lot of time over your life at this point deciding which would be your first classic car.
Yeah.
How did it come to this?
I'll tell you what, as a car junkie, there are so many cars, that I could have bought. I guess it would be like maybe for you hiking, like, hey, which, trail or mountain? I mean, there's so many of them. Like, how do you pick one?
Right.
For me, it was based on opportunity. I said, I love so many cars that when I feel that the opportunity is right, that the purchase is right, the car is right, when all of those things align, I think it's the right time. And I was able to find that with the 67 Camaro. It was purchased close to where I was living, already at a great price. It was completely restored, completely original.
Wow.
Had a lot of things that made the car unique. And I thought that the price that the guy was offering, man, was already a good price at the asking price. I found it on Craigslist, ironically, and reached out to the guy. We worked out a price and pulled the trigger because I said, you know what, I've been waiting for so long, to purchase this car, and it was never. I think maybe a lot of people can agree it's never the right time.
Right.
Like with so many expenses like that, it's never the right time. I said, you know what, I don't think it's ever going to be the right time. So I just pulled the trigger and said, it's something that I've always wanted, something that I want to do for me, and I went ahead and did it. And man, what an amazing feeling to finally, have this car.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Mm-hmm.
Does it affect you emotionally when your family members or friends of yours don't share the excitement when you go back and tell them a story about you bought your first classic car or you purchased a new vehicle, and they don't share the same enthusiasm based on how much effort you put into selecting the right one?
It is a bit disheartening, because they don't share in the same passion, so I guess what I would try to do next is maybe, as I spend a little bit more time with the cars, maybe try to find like-minded individuals. I none of my kids, man, I've got 3 girls and 1 son. They love the car, they've all ridden in it at one point or another, but none of them are like, wow, it's like it's like,
Really?
what a great car. So not even my son, who's probably watching. So yeah, man, the passion really isn't shared. It kind of stops with me.
Yeah. So I know I asked you your recommendation for a person like me that maybe isn't as detailed when it comes to purchasing a classic car, American muscle, or a European style car. But if I was going to get my first classic car, and you know enough about me, what would you recommend to me to look for?
You know what? I think there's a couple that I'd recommend to you, man. First of all, man, because I know your lifestyle, I think that you would probably do well in one of the older style and more original Ford Broncos.
Oh yeah,
Which I think everybody's seen that the new body style that's coming out mimics
sure.
the older style, man. I think those are
So it doesn't have to be a car.
No,
a classic.
yeah, classics. I think from that era. Muscle car. Yeah, I think I could also see you in like a Charger, obviously a General Lee type car, GTO from that time frame would be definitely nice. Camaros, I think, are amazing.
Right.
So I definitely could see you in one of those 3 or 4.
So you mentioned American muscle cars, and obviously that's something that attracts me as well. And we know that there's a European style car,
Right.
Lamborghinis, Ferraris, that type of thing. What's the difference for you when you see an American muscle car and something from Europe, and how do you decide if you're going to purchase one or the other? Which one stands out to you the most, and which one would you recommend to a guy like me that has no background of understanding the details to get my first car?
Man, you know what? I think the difference, mainly for me, I think it kind of goes back to, if you think of 1960s American muscle, you're thinking big engines, big horsepower, the body styles. I think it kind of fits our persona a little bit more. When you start thinking of European cars, it's a little bit more finesse, it's a little bit, they're smaller. It's kind of pinky out kind of thing. So I just don't think that it fits kind of our body style, man. I think that's probably the best way to describe it, man. It's just not, it's too finesse of a car for me, man. And to be honest with you, beautiful cars. The European cars in the 60s, even in the 70s, were amazing cars, but not my style. And what I do like is astronomically priced. So their budgets, man, are
Right.
way out there. So probably be a car that if you could ever afford it, man, you'd probably just sit there and look at it and would probably never want to drive it. I want a car that I can actually drive and get behind it.
Right.
The sound of an American muscle car, that it makes is very different than the engine of like a European car. So all of those things come into play. But I think at the end of the day, a guy like you, I would steer you towards American muscle car, man, without a doubt.
What about speed, though?
Speed and performance, I think you can get the same. Obviously the European cars, man, were made to be extremely fast, the performance of those cars is phenomenal. Porsches, Ferraris from those time frames, amazing cars.
So you told me something I found very interesting, and that was your goal is to own a car from the year you were born, but you found it to be somewhat of a dilemma. Can you please expound on that?
Man, I'll tell you what, so without any secret, man, I was born in 1974. Ironically, they consider 1974 kind of the death of the muscle car.
Really?
So,
how ironic for you.
Cars completely changed in like 74, 75. Emissions testing kind of changed the horsepower. This embargo that we had on oil, safety, they had to put these like huge, ugly bumpers now on cars. So, ironically, all of this started in 74. Why do I think it'd be cool? I think, to be honest with you, it'd be kind of like a time capsule for me, to say, hey, this car is basically the same age as me. It's, the cars that were around when I was born, but I cannot find, other than European, because in Europe they didn't have these standards, I guess. So the European cars that you find are still, they look pretty good, but everything, if you look at Mustang, Camaros, Firebirds, Corvettes, horrible cars, man. Horrible cars.
Do all classic car owners share that same sentiment about 1974?
I think so. It's almost like I said, officially the death of the muscle car. I think Dodge was maybe the only American muscle company that was still, or American muscle car that was still making cars with a little bit of horsepower and still looked okay. But when you look at, just like a year or two before, to what they became in 74 and beyond, the car is almost unrecognizable performance and cosmetically. So I've not been able to really find anything from 74 other than, like I said, maybe something European that I'm leaning towards.
So if you have, I'm sure you're looking for another classic car in your future. What do you think would be something that you're looking at purchasing now for your second classic car?
I think I'd apply probably the same technique that I told you before, where it's maybe about opportunity, price, what's happening. But if I could pick one right now, for me it'd be 1970 Chevelle SS.
Oh, wow.
Beautiful cars, big engines. I love the body style on them. It just, to me, it screams, American muscle. So that'd probably be my next car, would be a 70 Chevelle.
So when you watch a lot of these old movies, I say old movies, 60s, 70s, 80s, even probably current movies where they have these old classic cars in it. The car from Bullitt with Steve McQueen stands out to me. What was that car again?
It was a Ford Mustang.
Ford Mustang.
Yeah.
And it wasn't a specific name?
It was a fastback, I believe. Like the dark green fastback, 67, I believe it was.
Okay.
Bullets, they've made them now, and they actually call them Bullitt Mustang.
Bullitt Mustangs, that's what I meant. Yeah, okay. And then what about like Starsky and Hutch and then the Gran Torino?
Gran Torino, I really wasn't a fan of that one. Of course, it looked cool as a kid when you watched the show, but for now, for me, it doesn't really. It's too big, too bulky. It doesn't really fit for me what I call muscle car.
And I embarrass myself when I have to ask you what these cars are called, but Gone in 60 Seconds with Nicolas Cage, that's a popular car as well.
Yeah, so that's the what is that? The Mustang, what do they call it now?
I see it all the time advertised.
They make so many replicas of it, man. It's almost like, it's kind of like when you hear a song over and over again on the radio, it's like everybody has just now redone this, I think, Shelby Mustang that they're trying to redo. So every ad in the paper, every car that you see around here, it's that replica of this Mustang, and I think they've kind of killed it a little bit.
What was that car in Cobra and with Stallone?
Man, I think that was a 1950 Mercury. Yeah, it was a Mercury. But man, those are price range, because I think, and movies make cars so so iconic that like, I'll bet that car maybe before the movie wasn't that expensive, but then it comes out in a movie and everybody wants to go out and get one. Yeah, so they become expensive.
Oh, wow. Wow. So here living in the UAE, right, and not the United States, I know we see every type of car that there actually is. You know, whether it's American muscle, whether it's a European car. Do you feel that the same love of classic cars is here as it is in the United States when it comes to not just cosmetics, but everything it provides?
Not at all. No, I've researched it, quite a bit. Obviously, being a car guy here, there is a culture. Don't get me wrong, but I think the weather, man, and something back to maybe what you're saying regionally. These old cars, man, they require a lot of maintenance, a lot of care. The extreme heat here would kill these engines. These engines, you remember, man, they run on older technology, so there's only maybe a few months out of the year that you could drive these cars. I considered bringing my Camaro to the UAE several times, and at the end of the day, I said I kind of felt like I was killing my car by trying to bring it out here. Here, man, we don't have really garages. Most houses here don't seem to have like an actual enclosed garage, so that's another thing that I think would kill these cars because they need a lot of care. And at the end of the day, it's not a lot of mechanics here that know how to work on these cars. So I think the same reason a lot of people don't buy newer American cars, because maintenance, parts, and everything, it takes so long to find them. Imagine trying to find parts, man, for like a 1969 Camaro. Your car would probably be down for a month or two before you could actually source it, find it, get it here, and then find a mechanic that could put it on for you. So I think all of those things kind of make it a very small market here in the UAE, which for me is disappointing.
Yes. I'm always intrigued by people that have a hobby, a passion, and they share it with other people to kind of educate them, but you don't force it on anyone. And I think that's one of the reasons why it stuck with me, that when we have a conversation, somebody brings up a car, and you share your opinion about it and you point something out to me, it's genuine. It's never like, hey, let me teach you just because you don't know this. And I think that's something that is very impressive, at least for me. So I do appreciate the conversation. And we were talking about living in the United Arab Emirates, and we both have lived here for 7 years and you a little bit longer. And there is a cultural difference. Even though there's a love of cars here and every type of car, there is a cultural difference. And here's what I mean by this, and I'd like your opinion. In the United States, we take a lot of pride in washing our own car. When you own a car that you really love, especially if it's a classic or something that's brand new, you take pride in doing maintenance on your own car if you know how to do it. Here, that's a culture that doesn't exist.
No,
they don't wash their own cars. They have somebody do it for them. They don't do maintenance. They have someone do it for them. How do you feel about that? And are you excited that when you are with your own classic car in the United States, when you go back to visit, that you actually do those things on your own?
It's definitely, I think for anybody that enjoys cars and loves to be around cars, man, washing the car, vacuuming it, kind of spending that Sunday morning, out there, just you and the car, maybe it's a little bit of music. I found that almost therapeutic and relaxing, so it doesn't exist here at all. I think if you notice, in the U.S., almost every other block or corner, there's like an AutoZone, some kind of maintenance shop where you can buy your own parts. And why? Because I think a lot of people like to do their own work on cars, whether it's your own oil change or something's broken. There's always a buddy that can help you with something. Here, it really doesn't exist, man. You have to take everything from something as small as like a light bulb. You have to go take it to the dealer. It just doesn't exist. And again, man, I think it's just a cultural thing, whether it's the weather or just people aren't very hands-on here with those kind of things. But I definitely do miss it, getting out there on any given day, washing, waxing, walking away from it, always kind of looking back to see what you did.
Yes.
So I definitely miss it.
I know we talked about driver's education and what you learned in, but what was your first car that you owned or that you drove around to school or whatever it was?
So the first car that I owned and bought was a 1978 Buick LeSabre, two-door. So I think that each door is probably the size of your table. And when I opened this thing,
they made that car popular in My Cousin Vinny. Did you ever see that movie?
I've seen it. I've seen it.
Buick LeSabre was the car that they made popular with these. It cycles around the story.
Yeah. So that was my first car. It was like a bronze orange with like a plaid interior. But I bought it from my cousin, ironically, and at the time, and I think this is maybe when I started to get into engines, because it didn't have the original engine in there. my cousin had dropped a 350 Camaro engine in there, ironically, so it had a lot of horsepower. So I had no idea when I bought the car about engines. And I remember the first day that I was with my buddy at the stop sign or the stoplight, and he's like, "Hey man, what does this car got?" And I said, "I have no idea." So we gunned it, man, and our tires started smoking.
Really?
You know, we kind of started skidding to the side, and I think after about a year of doing that, man, I killed the engine on that car. But my first car, 78 Buick LeSabre, love that car. I still see it now, and ironically, man, I look at them and wonder, would I ever go back to buy one just
Because it was your first
just
car.
because it was my first car? Yeah.
How old were you when you had the car?
I want to say I was 16 or 17.
And you bought that car yourself at that age?
Yeah,
Impressive.
yeah. So I was working at an Osco Drug as like a stock boy, saving my money, and in the summers I'd work at a job at a restaurant. So I was just kind of saving my money. My dad had a factory at the time, so I'd do some part time with him. So just trying to save money, and my cousin gave me a good deal on it, so I went ahead and bought it from him. And ironically, my first car, my first crash,
Everything in that car.
Yeah, everything in that car.
See, my father gave me a hand-me-down when I was in high school, which was a 1982 Pontiac Bonneville sedan, four-door,
Huge.
diesel converted from gasoline engine. And I have stories about that one. But not until I was a Marine did I buy my own car.
Yeah.
And the first car I bought was a 1993 Pontiac Grand Am. You can see I love Pontiacs.
Yeah.
And it was a four-cylinder. So I went back to like not knowing cars very well, that I saw this Grand Am. I loved the style. It was cheap because it was a four-cylinder, and I went for that.
Yeah.
And I lived in California at the time, so when I was driving up and down mountains, I struggled in that car, you know?
Yeah.
So knowing the things I know now and hearing people like you talk about the details of a car, you know, I look at vehicles a lot differently now when it comes to purchasing.
Yeah. Well, you know, I mean, back to your question about what car for you. I mean, since you kind of have history with Pontiac, man, you know, ironically, for example, like Pontiac and Oldsmobile, they kind of really don't make those cars anymore.
No.
So to get maybe a Pontiac for you, so like maybe a GTO or a Firebird, you know, Smokey and the Bandit car, something
Yeah.
like that. Because I think those are the cars that maybe we grew up with
We did.
in the 80s, you know, the Smokey and the Bandit car, Grand Nationals.
I
Those
love
are
the
the cars
Grand-
that, you know, we looked at as kids.
A Grand National. You know, that brings me to another question. You had talked about barnyard finds, and you had showed me a picture where two Grand Nationals
Yeah.
were found in a
Yeah, like a capsule, like
right
in a
box,
container or something. Yeah.
container, and they were literally with the sticker still on it, the plastic on the car. What an incredible find! So, what do you mean by that with a barnyard find?
Man, you know, to be honest with you, it's something like bucket list for me, where I would love to be able to come across a deal where, or I could say a find, where somebody's getting rid of a car and maybe they don't know what they have, or maybe they just need to get rid of it, and it happens to be an old classic, you know, whether it's in good condition or needs to be restored, but something that's just been almost like a time capsule, maybe decades that it's
Sure.
been sitting somewhere, untouched, unattended, layers of dust. I mean, I follow on Haggerty, which is this website, this guy that he's basically like the barn find guy, and he just travels all over the U.S. looking, you know, for these kind of things, and he finds them everywhere. So I'm like, man, if I can do that once
One time.
in my life, that'd be great, and to be able to either maintain it in its original condition, depending on how it was, or to restore it to what it, you know, looked like coming off the assembly line. I think that would be great for me.
You know, and to digress back to Pontiac, I have a very vivid memory of being a young kid in the early 70s, mid 70s, and my father had a Grand Prix,
Yeah.
Pontiac Grand Prix, and it was almost like the shape of a Batmobile.
Yeah.
The front, the hood was really long.
Yeah.
It had the big back where you lay on the top whenever you were on the highway as a kid, you know, and that car really stood out to me. That would be one incredible find because that's the first car that I really remember, you know.
And I would tell you, maybe now is the time to buy it, because this is kind of one thing that I think I read in a Jay Leno article, is that
You know, Jay Leno wears denim as a car guy. I thought, what a good choice for you
I
today.
was getting dressed today, so it's like my ode to Jay Leno. I said, what do I wear? So another thing that aside from the barn find for me would be, how do I buy a car now, for example, like maybe a 1980 something, whatever, 1990, and that's the future collector car. So maybe you sit on it for like 9 or 10 years, and then all of a sudden the price skyrockets because everybody wants them. So this article that I was reading, again, I believe it was Jay Leno, he was saying the way that you can do that is, what car did you like as a teenager? You know, so maybe now, as maybe these millennials, start to get older and they have a little bit of disposable income, like guys in our 40s, like we do, what would you buy?
So IROC Z28 for me.
So IROC Z28. So imagine you buy that now, and maybe in another few years, everybody's thinking like that, and there's a run on these Z28 IROCs, and you happen to already have one, but you bought it right before the run. So maybe a year or two later,
right,
the price for yours skyrockets. So that's something else I would love to do too, is kind of be able to predict or project what is the next collector car.
Yeah.
Buy it now while the market is still good,
Smart.
and then maybe in a few years
it becomes a classic.
It takes off and becomes its own classic. Yeah.
Yeah. So, I own a Toyota FJ Cruiser and 2014 model, and they stopped making them again. Yeah. So is that a vehicle that I could potentially see becoming a classic if they want to bring it back in 20 or 30 years?
It could be. I mean, I think when it comes to a classic, a few things they have to consider are how many of them did they make. So if it's a car that's very common, and there's like thousands of them out there, it's probably going to take a very long time before they kind of run out of production. They get junked, they crash, they're not in there, and there's just only a few left. That's kind of what makes it more of a collector. Unique. Now you have an FJ Extreme,
right?
So yours kind of
elevates a
little bit more to where, like, okay, now they didn't make that many Extremes, so it could be a collector in the future because it does have something that's unique to that car only. Your first owner, you bought it brand new,
right?
It's all original. So those are the kind of things that if you sit on it for a while, it could potentially become a collector car.
Well, here's something that I've learned since I've lived here. I didn't know about, like, United States has its own specifications. The Gulf countries here have their own specifications, so you cannot import and export your vehicles from one country to the other based on emissions, etc. It's frustrating.
Yeah, definitely, yes. And I think we're still trying to crack the code on this. Why? What is it? Is it safety? Is it emissions?
Right.
We have no clue, and even the dealers can't tell us. So you think, why can't I buy this car here and take it back to the U.S.?
So, with a classic car, how do you feel about an automatic or a manual? Because I've heard this a lot from people where when I rented a car one time, I rented a Corvette, right? And then my father let me drive his Corvette, and it's an automatic. And I took a video and posted it on Instagram. A lot of my friends attacked me for driving an automatic Corvette. And, not being such a savvy car guy, I was like, wow, I didn't think about that. Now, I learned on a manual. I grew up on a stick. But how do you feel about that?
I think, to be honest with you, I mean, it kind of encompasses the entire experience. You're kind of at one with the engine. So, I mean, you're feeling the horsepower. You're kind of in control of the car. So I think that's kind of more the entirety of the experience is just driving, shifting. It's kind of all part of it. Hearing the RPMs rev up, and then you're kicking it into the next gear. Automatic, I guess it's kind of a cop out, I guess you could say, because you're not part of the experience. So,
yes.
But to be honest with you, I mean, I would go for either one.
Sure. Okay, so I know you've been to car shows. You've even taken your Camaro to a car show and you've won, right? You've gotten good placements.
I took first place, with my Camaro.
Nice, that's awesome.
To be honest with you, I had no idea it was kind of like a competition car show. I was taking another car that I had into the dealership for some maintenance, and the guy was actually a pretty nice guy, so we started talking classic cars. I told him about my Camaro, and he had mentioned to me that they have like this show, not necessarily a show, but just a get-together where a bunch of classic car guys got together on the weekend. So I said, you know what, I decided to take it over there, and it just so happened that that day was a competition. So I went to walk around and see the other cars, and when I came back, there was a dude standing there with a trophy next to my car.
Oh, wow.
And he said, hey, man, we picked yours as the kind of best in show, and got a free box of donuts.
Hey, that's trophy. A great gift, yeah.
And,
great.
But it was a great experience. I mean, to see, like you said, I was finally around like-minded people that were just hovering around the car. And at the time, I bought it because I guess I hadn't had that shared feeling of like, wow, and this, that, and the other. To see these other people gawking at my car, kind of for me solidified that I did the right purchase. Where when they were seeing that. It's a 1967 Camaro, so maybe something we don't realize is that it comes with factory air conditioning. And for me, I was like, I was surprised by that, but I didn't think it was maybe the biggest factor. But all of these old car guys that were looking at it, and I had the engine popped up, the first thing that they were looking, I was like, hey, it's got factory air conditioning. And then it kind of dawned on me. I said, man, this car is like 50-something years old. So, of course, air conditioning
Was the first start
back
of
in
it.
'67 wasn't something common like it is today. And that it came with factory air conditioning.
Wow.
That's what these guys were most impressed with.
Interesting. You know, so when you mention like-minded people, you know, if I'm on a mountain, I'm doing hikes with people that enjoy the same thing I do, it validates the love that you have for it when you share it with others.
Yeah.
But I've always said that when I speak to someone that maybe doesn't have the same love for maybe going up a mountain or seeing, you know, a long trail, I always feel that if I take you with me and I have you experience a sunset or a sunrise, you would change your mind because I would be able to show you this. Do you feel that if you took someone that wasn't a car enthusiast to a car show and you watched or showed them how everybody responds to cars and what this is so special for, you think that you could change people's minds?
Honestly, no, man. I don't
Really?
think so. I think that it's kind of something innate from you from childhood that either you have or you don't have. So I think I'd be more interested in maybe taking a young kid that's maybe 8, 9, or 10 to a car show like that, and I think that would probably ingrain something in him or her
Yeah.
that they would probably remember for the rest of their days. But I think it's somebody that just doesn't have it in them with cars, and they go see, they probably be like, oh, it's just a bunch of old cars and smells like fuel and they're so loud, and they probably, you know, and then they'd say they're so expensive. You know, why are you paying so much money for such an old car?
Right.
I don't think maybe a very small percentage of people you could probably switch over to like them.
Well, I'll tell you, you know, I had that same feeling about cars. Like, why would I spend this much money on a classic old car, even though it looks nice, compared to something that's brand new? But over the last 7 years, with people like you and others that love cars, you've changed my mind.
Yeah.
So, I think it could be done.
Yeah, I think there, you know, I mean, you like cars, you have a passion for cars as well, and I think as you start to learn, you know, the nostalgia, man, behind these cars,
Sure.
you gravitate to that. But I think others maybe, you know, probably wouldn't be so interested in. But
Yes. And like for me with a car, I know what I like when I see it. And I can get behind the wheel of a car and drive it off-road, on-road, and drive, you know, crazy and put myself through different scenarios where I enjoy it. I think that's a lot of fun. I can grab a rifle or a pistol and shoot it well and feel comfortable, but it doesn't mean I know all the makes and models. That's one thing that I wish I was better at tying together. But I think, like you said, it has to be something ingrained from an early age to where you have this passion and love for it. Maybe you don't find it later in life.
yeah, no, I agree.
Yeah. Well, Ed, I appreciate your time. Thanks for
Yeah, man. Appreciate
stopping
you having
by.
me.
Yeah, it's a pleasure. I mean, like I said, you know, this is one of the many topics that I find that you are intelligent about, you're articulate about it, you're passionate about it, and you know, it does rub off on people. It made me learn things about cars I didn't know, and I always admit when I know something, and I admit when I don't know something, and this is one of the topics that I don't. So I really enjoy talking to you about these conversations.
No, I appreciate it, man. Thanks for having me. And you were definitely one of those too that kind of took me on these hikes and showed me, you know, the tough way. I think on a few different hikes.
And there was a Camaro at the top of the mountain.
Yeah, man, that'd be great. So I think it is interchangeable. So appreciate you having me. Always happy to talk about cars because, like you said, man, it is a passion of mine. I think till the day I die, I would like to have a nice collection of cars someday, and maybe my son can kind of
Hint.
yeah, maybe I can kind of get him
Test.
to like it, or maybe my daughters, man, I don't know, you know,
Yeah.
they might get into them too.
That'd be great. So, okay, are there any cars that you see that were developed in the year that your son was born, let's say, that you could potentially see being a classic later? Anything come to mind?
No, man, I've done some research, and okay, so the few, I guess this is maybe something that makes it a classic and out of your reach, but the cars that would be classics later are so expensive now. Like for example, a Shelby GT 500, you know, they only make, I think, like 300 or 400 a year, and the price tags for these things are astronomical. So the amount of income that you would have to be able to go to the dealer, buy that car, and then sit on it, you know, for 15, 20 years, kind kind of makes these Dodge Demons that they're making, 700 plus horsepower. I mean,
My
the
goodness.
price tags, man, are already starting high. So I don't see anything right now. I'm always looking to see if there's maybe something that comes out that was made in maybe a limited fashion, exclusively a certain few models that you can maybe jump on now, enjoy them, and then sit on them for a year, and then maybe there's a run on them. But this website, like I told you, that I belong to in Haggerty, they kind of predict future collector cars, and the ones that they're predicting, I'm not interested in at all. So I think that's something else that I wouldn't want to just sit on it just for money's sake. I would want to enjoy it, So
Yes.
I wouldn't buy something like a Toyota MR2 or something like this. That they're saying, hey, that's going to be a future collector. It doesn't interest me at all.
Yeah. Wow. Interesting. I asked you, Ed, earlier about one of your dreams is to own a car from the year you were born, and you told me that 1974 is what is considered the death of
Yes.
the muscle car. You spoke to someone that gave you some advice that maybe could help you find something that would be worth purchasing, right?
Yeah, like we talked about, man, death of the muscle car, 1974. So I said, let me see if there's anything out there or somebody with more experience with cars that could maybe help me find some. So I reached out to Chip Foose on his Instagram page. So I don't know if I was talking to Chip Foose, but there is some dialogue here.
He responded to you.
He did respond, or someone responded, but I asked him. I said, "Hey, you know what? With your experience, I'm trying to find something from my birth year of 1974," and he basically confirmed everything I said, man. Which is, kind of here he's talking about death of the muscle car, emissions, the engines, were underperforming, as he states here. But he does give me a few tips that I have to look into and see. So some of the ones that he does recommend from 74, the Ventura GTO, so that's in the Pontiac family, the Chevy Nova, Pontiac Firebird, the Torinos, the Chevelle, Duster, Roadrunner, Challenger, and Cuda. So I've got a little bit of homework to do and see if any of those tickle my fancy, but there is, I guess, some options still out there for 74, and according to Chip Foose, those would be some to look into.
Thank you, Chip Foose.
Yeah.
So which one of those cars stand out to you when you're reading it, though? Does any of them actually stand out to you where you're like, wow, that's a good choice? Be honest.
Maybe the Nova, because the body style didn't change that much in 74. It looks like it got a little bit longer and maybe a little bit boxier. But I've been a fan of Novas, and I think maybe the Nova would be one that I'd be interested in. But the others, I've seen those GTO Venturas.
Right.
Not interested in them at all. Maybe the Firebird would be something as well that I'd look into, because kind of more into the Smokey and the Bandit kind of look
Yes.
that we grew up watching on TV. But I think that would be it. And like I said, I would maybe gravitate in this case towards European cars, because I think there's the Tommaso Pantera, and this thing looks like a Lamborghini Italian car. Really nice, but again, man, way out of my price range.
I would think you made up that name.
No, I can't make that up. I can't make that up. It's a real car. I'll show you a photo so you can see that. For that era, beautiful car, really nice, but because they're very exclusive European, Italian kind of sports cars, most of the ones that I find on the internet, man, are close to six-figure and above. So don't know if I like 1974 that much.
The cosmetics of how it looks, what is it that really stands out to you about a car that makes you feel the way you do?
I think it's a little bit of everything. If you look at the cars from the, back to the 1960s and what I think made that era so unique, the name muscle car, it encompasses it exactly. They're big, beefy cars, huge tires, big engines, the sound, the roar of these mufflers. There's really not, if you look at the cars from the 60s performance-wise, I've driven them. It's kind of like driving a tank, in comparison to driving cars from today. But it's just, for me, the look, the feel is kind of what encompasses everything for me in that era.
Your time.
Yeah, man, thank you.
Yep. Social distancing?
Yeah.